Okay, so 5.NF.1 and 5.NF.2 focus on the exact same thing, adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. Now this does include mixed numbers, which is basically a whole number and a fraction being added to a whole number and a fraction with unlike denominators. Now NF2, that standard is focused on word problems, where NF1 is focused on the procedure and concept. So one thing I really want to make sure that's clear, because you may have noticed I have a 4th grade standard here. The thing about this is, with fractions, 5th grade only has adding, subtracting, multiplying, and introducing division. 4th grade, you're still working with number lines, adding, subtracting, comparing, and multiplying, where in 3rd grade, you introduce fractions for the very first time. And that's what I want to show you, is that in 3rd grade we introduced fractions, and in 4th grade we introduced adding and subtracting with unlike denominators as a concept with visuals. But most importantly, in 4th grade we introduced finding a common denominator by finding the lowest common multiple that's in the standard to compare fractions with different denominators. So in 4th grade, we really looked at how to compare fractions, amounts less than 1, to figure out that by balancing these fractions so that they each fraction was split into the same number of total pieces, we could then compare how many pieces we had. And that is going to pay off this year. All the hard work you did last year is going to pay off, because now we have to add and subtract with those. So I just want to really quickly review this 4.NF.2 standard, where if you have 1/2 and 1/3, and you're asked to compare whether it's greater, equal, or less than. Well, in order to change it into 3/6 and 2/6, in order to determine that 3/6 is going to be greater than 2/6, you have to understand that 1/2 is the same as 2/4. 1 is half of 2. This is 1/2. 2 is half of 4. This is the same thing as 1/2. 3 is half of 6. 4 is half of 8. 5 is half of 10. But the patterns that we see, they develop. The numerators are following a pattern of +1. And the denominators are following a pattern of +2. And the pattern between them that we can see is that each numerator gets doubled each time. So when you look at congruent fractions like this, similar fractions, it's easy to see why we want to look at the multiples of the denominator. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. And then for 1/3, 3, 6, 9, 12. Because when we look at those, we can start to see how the common denominators between 2 and 3, the common multiples are 6 and 12. And the least common denominator is the 6. So if you recognize the equivalent fractions here, you recognize that changing the 2 into a 6 is multiplying times 3. And the exact same thing is happening in the numerator. And just like down here, changing that 3 into a 6, look what we're doing. Look what's happening. It's being doubled. And up here, naturally occurring, that is also being doubled. So this, as a 4th grade standard, is the concept you were supposed to walk away with. Now, when we go into 5th grade and we start looking at examples of adding and subtracting with fractions with unlike denominators, we can see how that concept is now being exercised, where 1/4 is going to 1/4 plus 1/2. It's not going to equal 2/6. You don't just add denominators. That's not what a denominator is. So 1/4 and 1/2, you have to break this 1/2 so that it is represented as a 4th. So this 1/4 out of 4 pieces, and this 1 out of 2 pieces of the same size circle is not going to be 2 out of 6 pieces. If we follow the concept, if we use the concept we learned in 4th grade and change the 1/2 into 2/4, then we can see that we have 3 equal size fourths. So this 1/4 plus 2/4 tells us how many fourths we have. 3/4. Now if we were to break up the 1/4 and the 1/2 and make eighths, well, that would be very similar to if we were to compare last year with this example, comparing 1/2 and 1/3. If we were to keep going and compare 1/2 and 1/3 as 6/12, which is an equivalent fraction to 1/2, and 1/3, which is, and compare it to 4/12, which is a congruent fraction. 6/12 is greater than 4/12. So now, the reason why we don't do the eighths, why we don't change, like there's a shortcut where if you just multiply the denominators, 4 times 2 is 8, you get a common denominator. But it's going to get you 6/8. But 6/8 can be simplified into 3/4 if you divide both of these by 2. And so, yeah, you can multiply those and get the 8, and that's a shortcut, and then change the numerators accordingly. But then you're adding an extra step anyway. So you want to make sure that you do follow that that procedure of finding the multiples 2, 4, 6, 8, 4, 8, 12, and make sure that even though 8s are a common multiple between them, 4 is the least common. So that's going to make it the easiest to get the answer that you need. Okay? Now when you're looking at mixed numbers, the idea that 3 and 1/3 is the same as 3 wholes and 1/3 whole, it really is that simple as recognizing that you have 3 wholes, that's what that 3 stands for, and that fraction represents there being only 1/3 of that next whole. So you actually have 4 circles, but that 4th circle is only filled in with 1 out of 3 equal pieces. So 3 and 1/3, you can separate the whole numbers from the fractions for now. Okay? When you have to subtract, sometimes you might have to break a whole to make more pieces, but that's later. Now, what I want to point out is that if you take the whole numbers away for this problem and you just look at the 1/3 and the 2/5, okay? The 3 and the 5, they have a common denominator of 15. The 5 is being multiplied 3 times, so the numerator, the 2, will be multiplied 3 times. And up here, the denominator is being multiplied 5 times, so the numerator is going to be multiplied 5 times. And when we add 5 15ths and 6 15ths, we naturally get 11 15ths. So the answer is 5 and 11 15ths. Now down here, the last example, where we have subtraction, okay? We know that 6 times 4 will give us a common multiple of 24, because the multiples of 6 are 6, 12, 18, 24, and the multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24. So 24 is a common multiple, but by writing this out and double checking, we see that 12 is the least common multiple. So our denominator of 6 being turned into a 12 is doubled. So our numerator will be doubled. The 4 being turned into a 12 is being multiplied times 3. So our numerator is being multiplied times 3. When we subtract 10 twelfths minus 3 twelfths, we get 7 twelfths, and that's our answer. Okay? Now, again, NF1 and NF2 does rely heavily on a concept learned in 4th grade, and so you may want to team up with 4th grade and 5th grade to make sure that this concept is instilled in order for these procedures to be learned quickly and accurately.